When we think of Arthurian legend, our minds are drawn to dazzling deeds of chivalry, elegant ladies in courtly attire, and the enthralling quest for the Holy Grail. Little is mentioned of the historical Arthur. Indeed, if such a man ever existed, as proposed by many historians. To address Arthur himself, we turn back to the birth of Britain in 5th century, an age of darkness and despair before hope shone forth. Our sources are few, but using what is to hand, we will reconstruct events to show how Arthur is incorporated into the real history of our people. It will also be shown how Arthurian history underscores Arthurian legend. Arthur emerged as the people's protector against barbarian invaders eager for loot and land. Political decadence and material extravagance made Roman Britain tempting prey for pirates before and after imperial troops departed. Raids resumed as never before after Maximus took Britain's garrison to the mainland. Eventually, the Britons groaned under this intolerable burden. In 446, the Britons wrote to Rome's consul, "The barbarians drive us to the sea. The sea throws us back on the barbarians. Thus 2 modes of death await us. We are either slain or drowned." From Ireland came the Scots, from the north the Picts, and the east Jutes, Saxons, the Angles. Rome never answered. The empire which arrived on Britain's shores in August greatness whimpered away as its great domain strained under civil strife and barbarian invasions. Vortigern, literally meaning High King, invited Hengist and Horsa, 2 brothers, Jutish chieftains, to fight beside the Britons. The pair produced great victories for the Britons. Despite this, the natives knew only ill would come from their settlement. In desperation, Vortigern invited wolves into their midst who, though fierce, practiced paganism. Their ways proved hateful to God and Britain's customs. Germany's wolves sensed discord amongst the Britons. They seized the opportunity for gain. Their compatriots in Germany received messages of the Britons' cowardliness and the fertile land. Soon, more and more ships arrived, with hosts of invincible warriors. Soon Hengist extorted more lands and supplies from Vortigern, who married the chieftain's beautiful daughter. The High King fell under her spell. Saxons settled in Sussex, Hampshire, Essex and Middlesex, Angles in East Anglia, then also in Northumbria. Soon the Jutes grew impatient of their overlord. In a barbaric blaze, the Germans rose up at a council to settle disputes between the 2 peoples. The simple unarmed lambs entered the wolf's lair. At Hengist's command, the Germans drew daggers from their boots, massacring the Britons all aside from Vortigern. To save his skin, this king gave several shires to the invaders. Hengist formed common cause with the Picts. Together they brought destruction to Britain's fields and cities. From new homes on the shorelines, bands of warriors roamed the land, taking whatever they pleased, slaying all who resisted. Over the next 20 years, the invaders made steady inroads into Britain, securing their shires, then holding back British counterattacks. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written 4 centuries later, drew on Old English heroic poetic tradition to provide us with an unreliable chronology, but reliable characterization of these days. In 455, Horsa fell in battle against Vortigern's army, but 9 years hence Hengist and his son Oseg slew 12 British chiefs in battle. Aelle seized Sussex with his Saxons in 477, managing to secure a fort on the Saxon shore. Saxons arrived in Hampshire, whose stock established the West Saxon kingdom. The onrushing invaders soon proved insurmountable. Again, the Britons divided and fell before the foe. The recurring theme is great slaughter inflicted on the Britons. Battles concluded. The Britons fled from the English as from fire. Sieges ended so there was not even a single Briton left alive. Beleaguered bands of Britons fled to the mountains. But the Britons need no longer fear. Men had failed, but soon the divine assistance they called out for arrived. From amongst Britain's leaders, Ambrosius Aurelianus stepped forth, a man of good character and the sole survivor of the Roman race. The parents of Britain's protector wore the purple before falling in the storm's fury. For kin and folk, Ambrosius donned his armour, setting out to save the isle. Survivors from Britain's nobility gathered around him, fighting a war for liberation and light. Forthwith the Lord granted the Britons victories. Sometimes Satan gained the upper hand through his barbarian hosts. Gildas offers no date for this resurgence, presumably sometime in the 460s. The Britons rekindled their warrior spirit as the tide swelled to and fro, but all men must die. Sometime in the 480s, Ambrosius fell under the sword or from natural causes. Nonetheless, Ambrosius's heroic deeds earned him a prominent place as a British national hero, especially in Wales. Lacking a leader, Britain's prospects again looked bleak. A new lord must take on the burden. Arthur, a southwestern magnate, substituted Ambrosius as commander of the Britons during the late 480s. Whereas Ambrosius led a restoration of Romano-Britain, Arthur's own is Celtic in nature. He coordinated defensive efforts from Cadbury Hill. Excavation of the site proved local legend correct. Men occupied it during this period. The findings there point to around 700 to 800 inhabitants. In a time when warbands were usually 50 to 100 men, attracting this following emphasises Arthur's charisma and martial prowess. Arthur rallied kings more noble than himself. In other words, Arthur was no king, but a lord chosen to command. No later evidence accurately describes the man himself, so we must draw on inference and deduction. Likewise, little contemporary evidence attests to Arthur's existence. However, collective oral tradition remains strong. We must not forget the chaotic context of the invasions either. Manuscripts perished in flames, memory fragmented along regional lines. Elegy for Geraint. Before Geraint, the enemy's scourge, I saw white horses, tensed, red. After the war cry, bitter the grave, in Clongborth I saw the clash of swords, men in terror, bloody heads, before Geraint the Great, his father's son. In Clongborth I saw spurs, and men who did not flinch from spears, who drank their wine from glass that glinted. In Clongborth I saw Arthur's heroes who cut with steel. The emperor, ruler of our labour, in Clongborth Geraint was slain. Heroes of the land of Dyfnant, before they were slain, they slew. Gildas, relatively contemporary, fails to mention Arthur when discussing the resistance. Due to this and the myths surrounding Arthur, many academics contemptuously dismiss the possibility of Arthur's historicity. However, This should not deter us. Gildas writes as much as half a century, if not more, after the Germanic uprising, light only entering his eyes in the year of Baden. If Ambrosius stepped forth to lead the Britons in the 460s, it is chronologically unlikely for him to be amongst their ranks by the time of Baden, which is dated between 495 to 516. Nor does Gildas mention participants in the Battle of Mount Baden. Later, we will address why he failed to do so. Old Welsh poems from later centuries look back to a man named Arthur, a leader who rallied the Britons to win a series of engagements. Collective oral memory kept Arthur alive in the 7th century. British poems look back to his greatness, praising one warrior's prowess. A poet remarks, "Still, he was no Arthur." A host of works remember Arthur, not contained merely to a single region. The West Country, Brittany, Wales, the North, and Scotland all possess Arthurian traditions. It is impossible for all these traditions to have emerged uniquely about a single man. As to Arthur's resistance, the tide well and truly turned towards the Britons. 12 ferocious battles stemmed the invaders, each one fell in Arthur's favour. Arthur turned Ambrosius's counterattack into a radical resurgence. Fresh foreign foes always arrived to renew the fight. Unfortunately, due to an absence of record, we cannot delve into the specifics of each battle. Nennius claims they occurred across the Isle, accounting for Arthurian traditions across Britain. Battles usually occurred at rivers. The Britons either ambushed the Germans at suitable locations or relieved sieges. At one contest, Arthur bore a banner of the Holy Mother, putting the Saxons to flight, then pursuing them for an entire day with substantial slaughter. Most is known of the pivotal Battle of Mount Baden. This battle is the greatest Arthur fought. Cerdic or Cerdic, king of Belgae, grew jealous of Arthur's prowess. Cerdic is remembered as the founder of the West Saxon dynasty. However, his name is British, not Saxon in origin. The West Saxon genealogy in the Chronicle is especially conscious to strenuously emphasise Cerdic Saxon origins. A kingdom taking on the mantle of Anglo-Saxon leadership wanted to connect its founder to Woden, or Woden. Moreover, the Chronicle refers to him as Dux, an administrative title, suggesting he already held authority in Britain. It may be his forefathers settled as foederati, who married into British nobility, or that he is entirely of British stock. The traitorous Cerdic invited Saxons into his kingdom. Cerdic himself must have married a Saxon woman. The Chronicle's chronology of Cerdic's son Cynric is nonsensical, claiming he arrived as a chieftain in 495 and died in 561. At the lowest calculation, giving him a life of around 79 years. For some years, Cerdic waged war against Arthur's faction. Eventually, the Belgae ventured inland to besiege the settlement of Baden. Several German kings joined forces with Cerdic. All came under the command of Urzik to form a force several thousand strong. Mons Badenus probably denotes the hill fort at Badbury in Dorset, known as the Badbury Rings. Located at the intersection of two Roman roads, it was an important line of communication, the fort providing strategic defence to Wiltshire's hinterland. Forts formed an integral component to defensive strategy under both Ambrosius and Arthur, where horses rested and received fodder. The Britons fought on horseback, rushing to Germanic inroads to check them. Whether they be the eastern, middle and northern angles, the Jutes of Kent, the Saxons of Sussex, or those of Wessex, Middlesex and Essex. Battles in the north checked the western and northern invaders. However, the English consolidated their shoreline settlements, preventing expulsion from the Isle. The great Germanic host amassed to force a decisive battle with Arthur, hoping to overturn him once and for all. For 3 days they besieged Badon until a heroic host appeared on the horizon. Arthur rallied Britain's warriors to fulfill oaths to lord and land. As flames and fighting engulfed Badon, like Theoden, Arthur appears on the horizon to bring forth the dawn. With noble words, Britain's protector steals the souls of his warriors. A deafening war cry erupts, bridles snap. Cavalry surges forth in a heroic charge for the red dawn. Their swords cleave and shatter Saxon limbs and shields. An unstoppable wave of hooves shatters the English until 1,000 lie dead or dying. The rest retreat. Among the fallen lies Cerdic, his treachery suitably rewarded. Naturally, the Anglo-Saxon chronicles make no mention of this great slaughter. Amongst the English, only Bede does. Britain's invaders were beaten, but not ejected from the Isle. Blockaded on the coast, many invaders returned to Germania or settled in Francia. Arthur stemmed the tide, bestowing Britain with a worthy achievement, the only former West Roman province to hold out against the Germanic hordes during the 5th century. Arthur's victory brought an end to Germanic inroads into Britain's hinterland. For 30 years peace and order returned to the land. Britain enjoyed an unexpected recovery built on these wonderful events. Thereof kings, public magistrates and private persons, with priests and clergymen, did all and everyone live orderly according to their several vocations. Gildas articulates the perfection of medieval social order, wherein all castes and classes acted according to their station. Piety rules the land, and men willingly follow their leaders. Britain became a virtuous society, wherein honour upheld duty, one which expresses a perennial notion of order, whereby all act according to their standing, achieving actualization through this. The narrow path replaced the wide. However, much of this must be the nostalgia of Gildas's childhood memories, due to contradictions within his narrative. Having delved into the deeds of Arthur, it is now profitable to address his absence in Gildas's writings. Why did a near contemporary fail to mention him, but by the end of the century, literary pieces such as poems do? This question perplexed Welshmen for a millennium, and historians still strive to answer it. The most obvious and often proposed solution lies in the etymology of Aurelianus and Arthur. The former is a Latin name, the latter of Welsh origin. Arthur may be a Welsh pronunciation of Aurelianus. This solution is certainly tempting, but there are questions of etymology and chronology. Firstly, the Roman name Artorius bears closer resemblance to the Old Welsh Arthur. Secondly, it seems unlikely that Arthur and Aurelianus are one and the same man, for by the time of his ascension, he had led the Britons from Vortigern's time until Badon, if indeed they were the same person. Aurelianus must have already commanded men before the 460s, meaning he was aged between 30 to 40. It is unlikely he lived past 60, especially as he enjoyed a life of campaigning and command. Alternate chronologies have been formulated. Perhaps the British resistance began in the 470s, thereby placing Aurelianus at Baden. Other records place Baden in 516, making Aurelianus's presence impossible. Other answers must be turned to. Writing in the 12th century, Gerald of Wales records how Welshmen answered the question. After the Golden Age Gildas commended, all the laws of truth and justice were so shaken that the orders of men suffered subversion. Only a select few virtuous sorts held true to the narrow path. According to contemporary Welshmen, Arthur slew his brother. In response, Gildas threw his praiseworthy texts into the ocean. A similar piece of folklore is read in an appendix of Nennius, claiming Arthur slew his son Aeneas. The life of St. Gildas details animosity between Arthur and Gildas's family. This final piece was penned in Brittany during the 11th century, drawing on local traditions, which may again be attempting to explain why Gildas made no mention of Arthur. Folklore may be criticised by historians, but it is noteworthy that 3 separate traditions record strife between families, which can be connected to Gildas's reflections. Writing a moral polemic, Gildas had no wish to record the name of the man who contributed to this ruin, despite the great warrior's heroic deeds. A period of peace and order always contains the seeds for ruin, if not properly checked. Arthur may have been a great leader. He is not immune to the allures of power. Tales of familial strife abound in medieval histories. As Gildas wrote, civil troubles persisted even during the Golden Age. Welsh monastic literary tradition is particularly negative in its tales of Arthur. Texts remember him as a despoiler of the church. Need to do so arose from infighting, prosperous monasteries like neighbouring Glastonbury proving tempting targets. I do not add to these points to besmirch Arthur's legacy. Rather, I do so to aim at historical truth and to understand the man we are dealing with. Arthur is of his age. Even churchmen under the great Alfred complained of heavy tributes when fighting with the Danes. Matters worsen as the children of Baden's victors grew up ignorant of troublesome times. The tales of darkness and despair bore little fruit in their minds when times were prosperous and relatively peaceful. Nor had their fathers set good examples after Baden. Infighting quickly caused regression to ruin. An elderly Arthur fell fighting Medrot at the Battle of Camlan, briefly before the Anglo-Saxon resurgence. As Britain crumbled before him, Gildas penned his piece to provide instruction to contemporaries, hoping to turn them from vice to virtue. He aimed to associate Aurelianus entirely with Britain's revival, but decided not to fabricate history, as this would be against God's truth, choosing omission instead. In all of this we see the germination of history, which Geoffrey of Monmouth formulated in his Arthurian epic. There is undoubtedly history behind Arthurian legend. What then can we say of the historical Arthur? Beyond all else, he is a captain of men, chosen by kings to command, a great warrior and strategist who conquered. Without him, the Britons would have become the Welsh far sooner. His deeds earned him legendary status among the Britons, but he is not the man of Arthurian legend as we know it. As with all leaders, he is a man prone to the same ills and vices men fall prey to, especially when power and prominence bless them. His court did not resemble one of Christian chivalry. Rather, it resembled the courts of his day, revolving around the martial spirit of warrior bands, with Christian sentiment peripherally present. This Arthur remains a worthy figure, one from whom lessons are learned, and whose deeds inspired emulation for over a millennium. A people's protector who refused to submit when faced by darkness and despair.